My name is Anne and I am 24 years old, and I've had this recent newfound appreciation for Black History Month and for Black Canadian history in general. And that's because I've had the opportunity to relearn and unlearn the problematic and inaccurate historical accounts of Canadian history. So growing up, whenever it came to history lessons that we'd have in elementary school or in high school, everything was predominantly based on two groups of people, right? So we always spoke about the French and the English, and sometimes there'd be some sort of mention of Indigenous peoples. But from those problematic accounts, I concluded that A, colonialism in Canada was some peaceful, beautiful process that didn't involve any type of bloodshed, and that B, the Indigenous folks willingly gave up their land and weren't brutally murdered. And I also concluded from these accounts that Black people just didn't exist in Canadian history, and that the history of Black folks in Canada began fairly recently, so like in 1994, when my parents first immigrated here from Haiti. So I go on most of my life believing these things, only to recently, and I mean very recently in university, learn that A, there's such things as treaties with Indigenous peoples here in Canada, and that these treaties were disrespected, and as a result, Indigenous communities, they were displaced and continue to face physical and psychological trauma. And not only that, I also learned that Black people have been on this land since 1608, and that our history here actually contributes a lot to the Canadian history. So as I had mentioned earlier, now I'm in this process of unlearning the things that were super problematic, that were dangerously simplified, and I'm trying to replace them with the truth. So in this journey, I was brought back to an experience that I had in grade 6, where in grade 6, I was the only Black person in my class and one of the only Black people in the school. And my teacher at the time, who was a white woman, she made an effort for me to realize my difference in a very negative sense. So she'd make me feel small, she'd make me feel stupid, she'd make me feel inadequate in comparison to the rest of the students. And word for word, she told me that I would die in middle school, so implying that I wouldn't make it past grade 7, right? And not only that, she would enact practices that would target me specifically, and she would humiliate me just in front of the class. So I was brought up to a point where I was like, why am I being subjected to this type of treatment in comparison to everybody else? And obviously at that age, when you're in a space that's predominantly white, you begin to blame your skin. You begin to blame your hair. So it was actually in grade 6 that ideas of lightening my skin, of bleaching my skin began. And it was actually also in grade 6 that I started chemically straightening my hair. What this woman did, she succeeded in making me wish I was white. Because if I was white, maybe I wouldn't be getting this type of treatment. So this is the type of energy I'm getting from her. And this is the same woman who's teaching me during Black History Month, who's teaching me about Martin Luther King, about Rosa Parks. She's telling me to draw inspiration from their story, to be just as tenacious as them, and to not move out of the way when it comes to racism and bigotry. But in the same breath, she's telling me to move out the way for her white students. So it's like, Miss, which one is it? Should I feel pride in my Blackness or be ashamed of it? And that's the type of dilemma that I was going through when I was in grade 6. And at that age, I didn't have the language to describe what I was experiencing. I couldn't comprehend what I was experiencing. And in hindsight, now I see how traumatic everything is. And it's heartbreaking to me to think that there are students who are 11 and even younger who are facing the same thing, who may be unable to describe their situations. And just like me, they may be put in a situation where 13 years later, after that terrible experience, they're still trying to unpack it. And though at this moment my feelings are very valid, it's very exhausting, and it takes away from other areas of my life. Experiencing racism is such a traumatic thing, but I am just so impressed by how every day we continue to survive and push through it and thrive through it all. So for today's moment, I'm going to be discussing an incredible human who I had the pleasure of meeting in early 2019. And it's actually kind of embarrassing that I didn't know who she was as someone who majored in political science and who has a major interest in politics as well. I had met her at an event in early 2019, like I mentioned, and we were actually sitting at the same table. And I remember very vividly hearing whispers among other event goers being like, oh my goodness, Jean Augustine is here. Like, Jean Augustine, right? And you know when you're in those situations where you're supposed to know something, but you don't know something? So I was just trying to pretend like I knew who she was when I really had no idea. So I grabbed my phone, and I don't remember if the Wi-Fi wasn't working or if I was spelling Jean wrong, but I couldn't figure out who this human was. It wasn't until she stood up and started talking that I realized who she was and what she's done. And I think trailblazer is the perfect word to describe her and her legacy. So she was born in Grenada in 1937 and moved over here to Canada in 1960. And began teaching at an elementary school in 1963. And as she was teaching, she was also an active member of her community, volunteering in grassroots organizations that worked towards advancing women's rights and immigrants' rights, and also combating violence against women, drug abuse, and poverty. Very interestingly, she actually helped plan the first caravana in 1967. And she would also go on to receive her BA and her master's in education from the University of Toronto, which served her well in advancing her in her career, actually leading up to her winning the nomination, the Liberal nomination, for the Etobicoke Lakeshore District in the 1993 elections. So she actually went on to win that seat, making her the first Black woman to be elected to the House of Commons. She was an incredible politician who always brought important issues to light, especially those issues that affected women. And you know, this month that we're celebrating, Black History Month, she was the one who brought forward the motion in Parliament to have February recognized across Canada as Black History Month. And very interestingly, the motion that she introduced passed unanimously in December 1995. She was appointed Secretary of State, making her the first Black woman to be in cabinet. And later, she was selected to be a member of the Queen's Privy Council. She was appointed as the Minister of State and also selected to be the Assistant Deputy Speaker of the House. Later, she would retire from politics in 2005, but her advocacy continued. She actually became the first Fairness Commissioner in Ontario, where she stayed in that role till 2015. Till this day, she continues to advocate for her community and advance incredible initiatives that uplift women, Black women, everybody in general. Jean Augustine, you are phenomenal. For more information on this figure, on this incredible woman, please click on the links below.